creativity, I think, has been associated too much with that idea of, if you are creative, we're talking about you're creative, you're performing arts, those subjects, but it's not. Creative thinking is as applicable in the sciences and maths as it is in those other subjects. And it is a way of thinking. And I think that we all need space to think creatively. And I think that's really important. And again, when we come back to our education system, how much space do we actually allow our pupils to have to think for themselves and to get things wrong? Because that's ultimately where we grow, and that's where that resilience comes from, which is going to help pupils later in life when they move from adolescence into adulthood.
Welcome to the Independent School Podcast. Thinking and acting strategically is the key to both securing the future of your school and helping to build a more equal and just world. My name's Juliet Corbett. I'm a consultant, speaker and facilitator specialising in helping independent schools. In this podcast, I translate tried and tested strategy and fundraising techniques into a language that works for schools. So if you're a senior leader in a private school and you want your daily work to feel less exhausting and more strategic, and if you want once more to feel the joy of making the world a better place through education, then you're in the right place. Welcome, and let's get started on this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. So today I'm really excited to be joined by Richard Jones, head of Bryanston School, an independent co-educational school in Dorset in the UK. Now, while many of you will know Bryanston as a boarding school, in actual fact, its senior school is still primarily boarding, but it merged with Knighton House School in 2021, which is a day and boarding, prep and pre-prep school. So now you can have the all-through experience under the Bryanston banner. Richard joined Bryanston as second master in 2020, becoming acting head towards the end of 2021 and then being confirmed as head in April 2022. He has a bachelor's degree in industrial economics from the University of Nottingham and a master's degree in educational leadership. He came into the education sector as a teacher of business via the graduate teacher programme, and he shares with us today some of the reasons why he made that switch into teaching. Before joining Bryanston, he was previously at Canford School and St John's School, Leatherhead. In our conversation today, Richard and I talk about the importance of creative thinking as one of the many skills that young people are going to need to be able to thrive in their future careers, especially given that they may end up doing jobs that we don't even know about today. We also discuss leading a school culture which embraces change and the importance of both strategy and project management within schools. So many people have told me that this podcast helps them, which is great because helping people is why I create these weekly episodes. And I also hear from lots of people who need a bit more support. For those schools, I facilitate strategy away days for governors and leadership teams. I guide heads and chairs of governors through the creation and implementation of new strategic plans. And I lead regular one-to-one strategy advice calls with heads and directors of development. And the best part of my job is hearing from the people I work with that they're clearer about what to prioritise day to day. They're better able to lead change in their schools, and they feel happier and more confident that they're making good strategic decisions. So anytime that you feel like you need a bit of extra help, just drop me a message so we can chat. You'll find my contact details at www.consultjuliet.co.uk. So let's listen into my conversation with Richard Jones. So welcome to the Independent School Podcast, Richard. It's great to have you here with us today.
Thank you very much for having me, Juliet. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, looking forward to it too. So one of the questions I love to start with is asking people about the root of their passion for education. And for me, this always elicits something a little bit more personal, a little bit more of a kind of a backstory to people, which is a bit more engaging than just thinking about where your career has kind of passed through which schools. So for you, what is that root to your passion for education? Where does it start?
I hope I don't disappoint you with this answer, but I guess when I was at school and when looking at what career I would go into post university, education wasn't actually one of the options that I had. It wasn't something I had considered or thought about. I'd always thought that I would, head into the city, and economics was my sort of background, and that's the route I would go down. But after a couple of years post-university working in a couple of different industries, I decided that I wanted to do something different. I didn't feel like I had a particular purpose in what I was doing in the industries I was working in. And it was actually a good friend of mine who was a teacher at the time who said, why don't you come along and spend some time with me in my school? Because I think it's something that you might enjoy. And that was basically the first time I'd stepped foot back into a classroom or into a school since I'd left school myself. And just being back in that environment, I loved it. And that then started my new career in teaching, and it's gone on from then. But I guess the main reason why I made that switch and I got into education, and I've loved it ever since, is that feeling of purpose. And it can sound a little bit cheesy, I guess, but I'm a big believer in having that purpose in terms of why we wake up in the morning and what motivates us, and being able to see the difference that you make. And that's the reason why I love what I do, I guess. And I'm really pleased that I made the move to come into education when originally it wasn't something that I'd considered.
Yeah. Interesting in terms of a parallel from my experience as well, actually. So I did economics at university too, and felt that I was on an automatic track into the city or some kind of related field. And I felt like I had to kind of push against the tide a little bit to say, no, there's nothing wrong with going to city, but I didn't feel that was me. I didn't feel, like you said, I was missing that purpose. And then the first part of my career was sort of, I'll be honest, floundering around a little bit. Probably, you had a highly successful, and then made a kind of conscious switch. For me, I was trying out different stuff, figuring out what I liked, and then suddenly realized, okay, education is something that I can really see the purpose of.
I was exactly the same. And that post-university, I did the usual gap year and tried my hand at various different bits and pieces when I got back, and mainly sales based actually, and whether it be recruitment or in the energy sector. And it's interesting because a lot of the skills that I learned there are incredibly transferable into education. So in terms of being a classroom teacher, it's about building the connections and building the relationships with people and trying to persuade them. Ultimately you're trying to get them to buy into what you're saying and trust you. So those skills are actually really transferable from that sales background. And at the time I would never have thought that working in the sales industry would prepare me for coming into teaching, but actually I think it's helped me massively.
Yeah, interesting. And are there other lessons you've brought into your practice as well? So I wonder whether, as a senior leader, do you feel that having had that previous experience in a for-profit environment has given you a slightly different angle on things? Has that influenced the way you're thinking right now?
I think so, yes. I think so, because however we look at the education sector, and obviously in the independent sector, it's different, because we are ultimately, yes, we're a charity, but we are reliant on revenue, and our revenue being greater than our costs, and being able to survive and being able to reinvest. So that, I guess, that business side, that commercial side of life, that from my few years that I did before coming into teaching, I think has really, really helped me, because I know that from working with colleagues, that's the side of when they get into senior leadership that they find the most difficult, actually. It's sitting in those governors' meetings where you're looking at the numbers and budgets and finances, and that's the bit that they struggle with the most, because they've had least exposure to. So I think having a bit of a background in that has definitely helped. Definitely.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's that sense of understanding that you can have your value-based purpose, and that can sit alongside a slightly more kind of hard-nosed business mind, and that those two can actually sit really well together, because you can only achieve your values-based purpose if you're able to balance the books and make some tough leadership decisions in order to make that work.
Absolutely, and especially in this environment that we're in at the moment, there's lots of economic challenges that we're all facing. And there are always tough decisions that have to be made, and we've got to keep a really close eye on costs. But like you say, you're doing it knowing that the ultimate purpose is ensuring that that the school and the education environment that you're working in is thriving, and you're able to offer the best that you can for the pupils and the parents. So that's the two work together ultimately. They're absolutely linked, and sometimes I think that can be a challenge in the private sector. Is that people don't necessarily see that. They see them as two completely separate things. We're a school, we're not a business. and the decisions that have been made that are seen as business decisions. Well, how's that? How does that doesn't fit with the education side? And actually it does. It's all absolutely linked in. It's all working together with the same purpose. But and that is always a challenge. That is always a challenge.
Absolutely. And taking a slightly different slant on basically the same observation is that we're preparing our young people for a really changing working environment. I mean, we have no idea what the jobs our young people are going to be doing. Certainly by the middle of their career, it's probably going to look completely unrecognisable to us. And I know that you've sort of in the work that you've been doing in your education summit recently been thinking about how do we put pupils at the heart of that changing world, and how do we prepare them now for actually what is a really unknown future economic or kind of social environment in which they're going to be going into.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that I say to prospective parents when I meet them is that I don't know as a head, or we don't know as a school what jobs we are preparing their children for when they come to leave Bryanston. And that can be quite scary for them because lots of generations before us and the way our education system has been set up is to teach a specific set of skills and knowledge, because you would then go and do a certain degree qualification and go into a certain job, and people wouldn't tend to change careers a great deal. And we know now that that's completely different, and people will have numerous different careers. And also we don't know generally, as we just said, what the specific jobs will look like. The education conference that we had, which was fantastic, and we had some amazing speakers that were there, and it was thought-provoking about putting children at the heart of a changing world. And I guess I think most people would agree that our current education system was set up at a time where the real world was very different to what it is now, and the way we assess and the way we teach hasn't really changed a great deal in decades. So for the last century. So what does it need to look like to put children at the heart of it? And I think that's something that is the pandemic has shone a bit of a spotlight on education, and the way that we do things, and the way that education did change overnight by going digital and online, etc., showed that we can be far more flexible and innovative than we have been previously. But people are now starting to look at our current systems, and the work that the Times have done in terms of their education kind of review that they've led has been really interesting. They're talking about getting rid of, or their recommendation is that you move away from A levels and have a British baccalaureate system, which is really interesting. So more breadth at sixth form. Obviously, some schools now in the independent sector are starting to move away from the traditional GCSEs and still keeping some of the core ones, but teaching some of their own kind of curriculums and subjects now to complement those. So it's really interesting. Things are definitely starting to be discussed more, which is great. But as we know, the pace of change in education can be painfully slow. But it's the right thing that we're starting to look at what we do and why we do it, and actually what we need to do for moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll put a link to the Times Education Commission report in the notes. I think if you're in the sector in the UK, you've probably come across it already, but if you're listening from overseas, it might be quite new for you. But there's some really interesting, important topics in there. So seeing the shift from across the entire education sector, so including the state sector as well as independent, now towards a more nuanced understanding that this is about a much wider skill set, and that includes co-curricular activities, opportunities beyond the classroom, and a breadth, academic breadth being really important, and then a shift. I think we've been seeing this for many, many years, but we've certainly seen some independent schools shifting towards the international baccalaureate over the kind of last decade or so, and so seeing that discussion take place within the state sector as well. This does feel like, kind of as we're coming out the end of COVID, hopefully, I was kind of caveat that with it, hopefully, this is a good opportunity, isn't it, to be looking at all these things again. I wonder, one of the things that the strand in your Education Summit conference was creativity. And I know at Bryanston, you feel this is really, really important, don't you? And it's not just about artistic creativity, it's also important for the sciences. And I wonder if you could share with us your kind of thoughts, your pedagogical thoughts about why creative thinking is so important as a skill set for our young people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think around creativity, I think has been associated too much with that idea of, if you are creative, we're talking about you're creative, you're performing arts, those sort of subjects, but it's not. Creative thinking is as applicable in the sciences and maths as it is in those other subjects. And it is a way of thinking. And I think that we all need space to think creatively. And I think that's really important. And again, when we come back to our education system, how much space do we actually allow our pupils to have to think for themselves and to get things wrong? Because that's ultimately where we grow, and that's where that resilience comes from, which is going to help pupils later in life when they move from adolescence into adulthood. And partly due to our education system, we don't really have time. We've been looking at restructuring our week. And again, you're saying, well, actually, we need X minutes of teaching time and contact time. And soon a week just becomes absolutely ram-packed. Yeah. We're a boarding school, so we have more time than others. But it's about being really disciplined to say, actually, no, we've got to allow space in there for creative thinking, and encouraging that as well. And something we do now in our year 9 curriculum is we're quite different here, because we do allow our year 9s and 10s and 11s to have study periods, effectively, so what we call them assignment periods, which is unusual. That doesn't normally happen until sixth form in most schools. And so we allow them time in the week where they have to manage their own time, and they have to think about how they're going to use it. What work do I want to do? Or do I want to go and focus on something slightly different? And that's a big step to take. And they might not get it right to start with, but by the time they get through to sixth form, we believe then that they're far better prepared for managing their own time properly. And that's really important. But yeah, things are changing all the time, and being able to have that analytical thinking, that creativity, that entrepreneurship sort of mindset as well, I think is absolutely crucial. And that all links together, and it all works. So, but that doesn't come at the expense of the focus on numeracy and literacy. You don't have to keep the two separate. Ultimately, it's hard to be creative or artistic without a deep understanding of the discipline, first and foremost. And you can't push the boundaries unless you've mastered that discipline first. So it's really important that you have that knowledge, that foundation. And once you've got it, that we do take some risks, and we do allow our pupils to explore things, to have the time, to have the space, to think creatively. And again, sometimes that's hard to do when you are teaching to a curriculum and you're teaching to exams that are coming up at the end of the year. And that's where I guess we're lucky, because we have our co-curricular and we have our pupils with us a lot. So a lot of that opportunity, the opportunity to do those sorts of things, come outside of the classroom. Now, obviously, lots of schools don't have that ability to do it. They don't have that time, and they don't have that space that we would have. So that's where we really build that in, is outside the curriculum at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of not everything that you've just said, but a lot of the themes that you've just mentioned there are joined by this idea of encouraging young people to be independent and to take risks, and actually understand what is an appropriate risk to take. And that might mean pushing yourself beyond a comfort zone to get onto a stage and taking a risk of, maybe I don't look that great doing what I'm doing, or it's a risk of kind of understanding how they're gonna, I'm gonna not do my homework, I'm gonna mess around in my study period, or whatever it might be, and that's a risk, and you've got to manage that risk and then learn from when you get it wrong. And I think sometimes in our society we've protected children from risk, which of course in many situations is the right way to go about it. We don't want them to expose them to a safeguarding risk, clearly, but at the same time we have to encourage them to understand, how do you balance these decisions around how to allocate your time, what decisions to make, when to push yourself outside your comfort zone, when to protect your resilience. And all of this is around managing risk, isn't it, really?
Absolutely, 100%. It really is. And we have, as a society, no doubt, we've moved towards being more protective. And I've got a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, and even with them, when it comes to climbing trees and things like that, and my wife is going, "Oh no, don't let them on." And it's like, no, they've got to go up there. Obviously, I'm not going to let them go too high, but let them do those things. Let them, and we're lucky because we live on the site here on the great campus, and they do get to go off and explore and take their walkie-talkies with them. So we're really blessed that they can do that. But we've got to allow them to explore safely. And again, that's one of the great things about schools like this is that we have fantastic pastoral systems and structures in place whereby pupils can be given the space. Inevitably, lots of them will make mistakes and they'll get things wrong, but there's a really strong structure and support network in place to catch them when that happens. And then it's about them learning from that incident. There's I know a number of schools do something called the Ivy House program, which is set up as a kind of corporate leadership thing, but they do a lot of work in schools now, and there's something a model they use, which is, I think it's called the accountability ladder, and it's getting pupils to think about their behaviours, and when they do get something wrong, how do they react? Do they blame others? Do they make excuses, or are they taking ownership for it? And learning from it, and that's ultimately what we're asking for. People our teenagers will all make mistakes. We all, as adults, we make mistakes all the time. But it's about being able to having the bravery, I guess, to put your hands up and admit to that and learn from that. And that's certainly something that we speak about a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a cultural thing as well, isn't it? And you mentioned before some of the things that you're doing in terms of practical things to do with timetabling and so on to build creativity in. But this is also about making some of those tough decisions to guide a school culturally through the pandemic, through a cost of living crisis, and understand and actually what are the pressures that your teachers are under in particular, what are the ways that you can support them, but at the same time encouraging an openness to change and to innovation and creative thinking around how things can happen. Have you thought about that proactively, or is that something that you feel just sort of that you navigate on a day-by-day basis almost instinctively?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question, and it's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge because if I take Bryanston specifically, it's, we have a pretty unique way of doing things, and people are quite rightly very protective about the way that Bryanston do things. And so there is always, I think, when anybody comes in externally, there's a slight, okay, are they going to change? What are they going to change here? And are they going to change too much? And that's something that probably most schools and organizations will face as well. The pandemic helped, again, in terms of that sort of the phrase of, well, we've always done it this way, was kind of just taken out of the equation overnight, because everybody just had to change and pivot straight away. So like obviously in education, it was primarily around moving online in the whole digital world. That became something that people maybe didn't embrace a great deal or hadn't had much exposure to, and everybody was using it straight away. So that changed things significantly. We're now back into the post-COVID world, and I guess it's very easy to slip straight back into the way that we did always do things before COVID. And the challenge is to make sure that we say, well, actually, don't forget, a lot of the things we did during the pandemic, we did some really great things, things that have helped the pupils, have helped the staff become more efficient, etc. We can't just slip straight back into what we were doing beforehand. And so that's a challenge. And I think, again, people's mindset, there's been lots of disruption, lots of uncertainty, not just in the workplace, but in people's personal lives over the last few years. And people do look for those anchors. They look for those things that, oh yeah, that's back to normal. And some of that's really crucial, but also it's about looking at the things that we can still keep improving and changing and doing differently. And as we go back to what the changing world is like and what it means for pupils, we do need to look at what we're delivering. And we're talking about a bigger focus as a school on entrepreneurship, on digital skills in the digital world, and what do we need to equip them with for when they leave here. And everything we read in the newspapers and everything that always comes out is about how we are failing to produce the pupils that industry need. Basically, they don't have the skill sets required for a modern economy. And so for me it's about finding what are those, what are businesses looking for, what are the skill sets that we need to be producing here, and how can we play our part in doing that so that our pupils are prepared. And a big focus on that is, like I say, is around that creative thinking. It's about being innovative, that unbounded thinking, and around that entrepreneurship as well. Yeah. So anything we can build in to our daily life here and have themes in those areas is really, really important. And I think people do realise that. They do. and we are a pretty progressive school. So it's just having the rationale behind any changes that you're making. That's the key thing, showing that you've clearly thought it through. This is the reason we're doing it. And this is the impact that we hope it will have. And then you assess it and you look at the impacts. Has it made the differences you want? And then you tweak and adapt it as necessary. So I think as long as decisions are explained properly and people understand the journey you're going on and what the vision is, then people are willing to embrace change. It's when it just comes at the drop of a hat without any clear explanation that people understandably have issues with it.
Absolutely. And it's really important. There's almost like an equation there for change management in what you've just said there. The idea of giving the people that vision to be really excited about, like, this is why we're making changes, explaining why this particular change helps to move in that direction. And then, as you said, I think there's an involvement piece in that, involving people. And as you said, monitoring how it's going is critically important, and making people understand, like, I'm willing to change our mind. We haven't just made this decision and we're going to sort of stick with it regardless, but willing to change our mind. But we believe this is the right choice and we're going to monitor it and see how it goes. And if it doesn't go as we planned, absolutely we'll make changes. It's sort of more of an agile process, an iterative process of leading change.
And I think something that we've seen here as well is that transparency. It's the transparency with the people who are delivering, with your staff body, your teaching and support staff, and being really transparent with what you're trying to achieve. And people, I think, certainly in the independent sector, realise that it's a competitive and it's a tough market, and the school has to evolve and the school has to move forward to remain competitive and to keep getting the pupil numbers that we need. And so again, I think presenting, that's where the two things come together: the business side of it and the education side, and being completely transparent, giving people the information about where we are as a business and as an organisation, and that does inform some of the changes that we need to make. So the more honesty and transparency you can have, I think the better. Yeah,
absolutely. And the kind of school strategist in me is getting really excited by everything you're talking about, because what I'm seeing here is a whole host of tweaks, changes. They're not massive changes, but tweaks to the way that you're doing things, with a thread of consistency through all of them. But actually, interestingly, they serve the school in multiple ways, because they're preparing young people for a workplace which is quite uncertain. Simultaneously, they're preparing young people to be really flourishing as individuals, to have that well-being, that resilience, that sense of understanding who they are and what their own purpose might be in life. And simultaneously, I can see how, if you communicate this to parents, your customers, basically, you're selling an idea which is really coherent and joins up with what society's asking for at the moment. So for me, this feels like all the jigsaw pieces kind of coming together. What are your thoughts on strategy for schools? So I know you mentioned before having a slightly more being comfortable around the idea of the school being a business as well as a school. What's your approach been to strategic planning and so on?
Yeah, it's obviously at the top of, as a head of a school, strategy is the number one area that we're responsible for and constantly looking at. We, as a school, have had quite a bit of change in the last few years, and I think one of the bits of feedback that was coming through from staff and parents, to be honest, as well, was just about, we really need to understand what the school strategy is and the vision for the future and where we're going. And we don't mind decisions being taken and things changing, but we just want to know where it's leading, and that's the basics of what should be in place. But with changes in leadership and COVID, that's made it all very difficult. So on taking over as head, that was the priority for me and the governing body and the rest of our executive team, was to be really clear on what it is our strategy is as a school and where we want to go. And we were very lucky, Juliet, to have your expertise helping us with that and working with us as we went on that journey to really identify what's important to us as a school and an organisation and where we want to go. And so we've done lots of work on that this year, and I guess talking through that and articulating it and being able to present that to people has been reassuring for both staff and parents and all stakeholders for the school. But I guess the hard work really starts in terms of how you implement that strategy. That's the next step, because we all know the types of schools that we work in are, once you get into the day-to-day term time, it's hard to get your head up sometimes, and to really keep that strategic work as the key focus, because you get dragged into all the other bits of running your school. So that's very much the challenge, is how we implement it. And that's not that's it's an ever evolving process. But we're really keen on drawing up what those sort of KPIs are for us, for being really clear on who's got ownership of those different strategic pieces, really clear measurements, timeframes, and taking the time to meet really regularly to have those sort of progress updates. And as a team, holding each other to account on them as well is absolutely crucial if we're going to make forward strides on it. It's like I say, otherwise it becomes a little bit too easy to keep that brilliant looking vision on a piece of paper, but it doesn't actually get translated into what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is something that heads and chair of governors kind of mention very, very frequently when I'm working with them. And it's that balancing act, isn't it, between, I know we were working very carefully to make sure we had that clarity of vision, and that's really important to get that right, but then actually living that vision. And I think one of the big tips I always give school leaders is you cannot do everything. You'll be surprised by how much you can achieve in a 5-year period, but in 1 year, don't be overly ambitious, because you want to demonstrate that you're making progress on the things that you have stated you're going to achieve in that 1 year. And so it's making decisions, isn't it? I mean, you mentioned before, tough choices. And sometimes that means picking 1 or 2 key projects that are going to really strategically drive you forward, whatever that might be, and picking carefully the ones that can have multiple positive impacts across the school. And then saying that there are a couple of projects that you want to do, but actually that's next year, or that's year 3 of the strategy. And kind of that's having the confidence to push things down the track, knowing that you will get to them. But if you try and tackle everything simultaneously, it's just overwhelming, and people don't have the time and not necessarily the ability to change that quickly to make it a real success as well. I don't know whether you've done that. Have you found that you've been prioritizing and having to prioritize because of that lack of time?
We have, but it's also amazing how interlinked all those different pieces are, all those strategic pieces that all link together. Very few, there's hardly any that stand alone there. So, no, you're absolutely right, and that it's about having that discipline, isn't it, and that confidence to be able to turn around to governors ultimately, and to say, actually, we can't achieve all of this in the next year. We have, like you say, we have to prioritise and have to focus on 1 or 2 particular things, and lots of some of those goals are really long term and require an awful lot of planning to happen. So it's having that model where you can clearly see which projects are live and at what stages they're currently at as well, because some of them need planning, research, use with external partners, and will take a bit of a while to get off the ground and to really move forward, but you can still be involved in the planning stages of those. And at that time, that's when you can be embedding some of the other strategic goals. You can get those up and running a little bit quicker. So again, it's just that overall view of what you're trying to deliver. Having that big vision piece is really clear.
And as you mentioned, sort of KPIs and annual action plans and really clear assessment of who's responsible for what. It stops being strategy and starts being planning and kind of operational logistics, get that word out. But that's actually what delivers it at the end of the day. And so having someone on your team who has the ability to really keep on top of each of those things and understand where each project is at, like project management basically, is really important. And
that idea of project management is really interesting, because again, on the sort of the education side, whether it's myself, whether it's the deputies, etc., none of us have really been involved in project planning as a career or as a skill or anything like that. So that's quite interesting, and actually for people going through leadership in schools, having that project management sort of skill set is actually really, really important. It's absolutely crucial, and I think it's possibly something that we need to do more of in school leaders is look at that project management skill set.
Absolutely. And without that, there's no point having the most amazing strategy in the world, because it's just going to end up a PDF on your website and never actually become a reality. So you're completely right. One of the other big trends I just want to kind of touch on before we finish within the independent school sector is the increasing number of bursaries and state school partnership work that independent schools are doing. I wonder what your thoughts are on where Bryanston is on those topics, those issues.
Again, they're a key strategic aim for us. That's something that came through really loud and clear in our strategic planning and our strategy days, and as they should be. Again, I think historically Bryanston has I think there's room for improvement in terms of being better in both those areas. We're looking now that my predecessor has formed really good links with the Blandford Schools network here in our local area, and we do lots and lots of work with them now. And it's not just about, we can learn so much from them, and I think that's really important, is that sometimes it can be seen that private schools are there and they can help with minibuses and they can help fundraise for things and give resources, but actually we can learn so much from the state sector as well and our state partners, and that's absolutely crucial. It's a two-way relationship. So we're doing loads of great work with the Blandford School, which is super, and the local primaries. And how we keep building that is something something we'll keep looking at. We're fully engaged with that. And then on the bursary side of things, again, we, like all private schools, we are committed to providing bursaries. For us, it's going through and looking at those. You have your transformational bursaries, which are really, really important, to make sure we're targeting those in the right way. And then more and more you get parents who aren't necessarily looking for 100% bursaries, but they're looking for 30, 40% bursaries or 20% bursaries because two working parents, but they just can't afford the fees that we charge now in the private sector. So it's a real mix of people who are coming forward for bursary support, but it's making sure that we're allocating our bursary support in the right areas is absolutely crucial. We as a school, our development director is relatively new post. She's fantastic, building a new team there, and it's a real area of focus for us in terms of social mobility. It's absolutely crucial that we're allowing people access to this type of education, who are really going to benefit from it.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us full circle, doesn't it, back to that purpose that we talked about at the beginning, and kind of linking back to the values and the purpose that we have as to why we're in education, doesn't it?
Of course it does. And we've been lucky enough to be able to support some Ukrainian children who have come over to the UK, who are with us now. In September we'll have 5 Ukrainian pupils who will be here, who we're fully supporting, which is amazing. And the fact that we can do that is super. It's really great, and yeah, that purpose and why we do it, and the whole community benefits from that. It really does. And like I say, our head girl actually stood up on speech day on Saturday and gave the most incredible speech to kind of hundreds of parents and pupils, talking about the fact that how she's battled with the fact that she's at a private school during her time here. And she's on a bursary. She spoke about that and talking about how no pupil at this school should ever take it for granted, and how we now use this education that she's been given. She wants to go out into the world and make a real difference. And it was really, really passionate. And I'm not sure we filmed it actually, which is a real shame, because it's the sort of thing that when people think of the private sector and some of the attitudes within it, and it gives us a bit of a bad name. If you listen to Esme speak, it was really, really powerful. Yeah, it really was.
I love it as well when we as kind of leaders within the sector get completely upstaged by our young people who show such maturity and passion and the ability to create a really beautiful argument for why change needs to happen. And I think we've seen that with the way that young people have led some of the big social changes that we've been talking about over the last years, when it comes to environmental kind of activism, talking about
they are
Black Lives Matter.
They're absolutely at the heart of it. And to empower them is rather than us trying to drag pupils along. Yeah. Not, on different topics, but education generally, the pupils should be the driving force behind it. And empowering the pupils, well, like you say, whether it's Black Lives Matter, everyone's invited, those are really important issues. The pupils certainly here have been driving the agenda on that, which is amazing, with us supporting and seeing how we can work with them on that journey. And that partnership is really important, because then pupils don't feel like education is something that's been done to them. They feel it's something that they've got ownership in, and that, in terms of the relationships between the kind of the children and the school, it just makes it a really positive place to be, and you can achieve great things when you get that.
Yeah, and that's real pupil voice, isn't it? That's not just kind of give a termly survey of how people are thinking. That's genuinely listening to the concerns and of our young people, and the way that they want the world to change, and then enabling them to think about what their role in that might be. That's why we do this job. Absolutely. All those long days, hard work. This is why we're in education. Thank you so much, Richard. It's been fantastic to talk to you, and really interesting to have a conversation that spanned kind of from our unknown future in terms of where our young people are going to be going out into the world and what kind of jobs they're going to be in, the importance of creative thinking about culture and the culture within our schools, and the way that strategy then needs to cascade down into really secure project management skills as well. Fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Juliet. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye then.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Independent School Podcast, the podcast that helps senior leaders in private schools to think and act more strategically, both because they want to secure the future of their school and because they want to help build a more equal and just world. You can listen in everywhere that podcasts are available. And if you want to catch up on previous episodes or follow any of the links that I've mentioned today, just head over to www.consultjuliet.co.uk/podcast.